hello. My name's Justin McClure, and I'm here today with
Will Sloan.
And you're listening to the Important Cinema Club. And today, we're going to be talking about Roger Ebert.
And Roger Ebert, a subject I know inside and out. And a subject that I think I feel a little ambivalent about these days.
Really?
And that you're probably not a particular fan of, right?
Well, I can appreciate Roger Ebert, but it really comes down to the fact that he had no place in my life as a young cinephile. Mm-hmm. When people talk about Roger Ebert, they talk about him as the critic that was the most approachable. He was like the solid base. He was in your TVs every week to give you what movies are good and bad. And at the same time, he was also considered like a mainstream critic to be looked down upon.
He was kind of the midpoint between a scholar and a hack.
Exactly.
He was obviously a very smart guy, a very well-read guy. He knew film history very well, but he appealed to people most as an ambassador for cinema, somebody who, with his great movies reviews, for instance, gave people a roadmap to the canon. And with Siskel and Ebert, I can't imagine how many bloggers or YouTube critics or even, high-level film critics now probably watched that and said, hey, I can do that.
Yeah, because back in the day, critics like Pauline Kael were like intellectuals, right? When they talk about film in a very specific and personal way. And while Roger Ebert was very passionate about what he was doing, he also spoke about it often in a very general way. Mm-hmm. Like, what will everybody enjoy? Mm-hmm. And it's interesting how he got into film because that was not what he wanted to write about principally.
Well, I know that he was a newspaper man, basically. In his early 20s, he worked in newspapers when he was in college, and he hoped one day to become a novelist, but he was assigned to the film criticism beat by his editor when he was something like 24 or 25. That was around the time when, thanks to Pauline Kael and certain others, movie critics were starting to become
cool.
Yeah, cool. And Ebert, because he was the youngest film critic in the country at that time, found himself on the right side of the generation gap on certain movies. Bonnie and Clyde, 2001: A Space Odyssey. These are movies that came out the first year he was a critic.
He was the one that was like crushing influencers like Bosley Crowther, mm-hmm. who for a long time, like they made or break a movie, but their tastes were completely out of tune, while people like Pauline Kael and Roger Ebert had their pulse on what was going on.
But the other thing is, Roger Ebert was very square.
Very square.
And I think for guys like us who are interested in some alternative type films, there are times when we look at somebody like Roger Ebert almost as an enemy.
And that can be summarized in something that was very popular, which was his review for Night of the Living Dead that appeared in Reader's Digest. A famous review that we've spoken about before, which Roger Ebert doesn't necessarily react to the content of the film, but is disgusted by the fact that children are in the audience watching it.
He doesn't even seem to, like, the movie is very secondary to his reaction, and when he reposted the review on his website, he, gave it a little disclaimer at the start where he's like, well, this wasn't a reaction to the movie per se, I actually admire the film, blah, 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 but, I don't think he did. He was somebody who, on his show, Siskel and Ebert, in its early days, he and Siskel had a segment called Dog of the Week, where they would just go to a grindhouse and find some piece of shit to rag on. And oftentimes that piece of shit would be like a Shaw Brothers kung fu movie or an Italian horror movie or something that people like us would like.
Even though that he was like a mainstream film critic, he still had to position himself as an intellectually superior to something, which is why something like Dog of the Week can let audiences know, we know that this is bad.
To his credit, he's somebody who, I guess, even though he was always a very middle-of-the-road critic, he's somebody who had the capacity to grow. In his great movies review for The Good and the Bad and the Ugly, the first time he reviewed the movie, he gave it 3 stars. And in his great movie review, he said, as I look back on my old review, I see that I gave 3 stars to a 4-star movie, probably because I had a bias against spaghetti westerns.
Mm-hmm. Did you used to watch Roger Ebert on television when you were a kid?
Yes, I did.
You're more of a Richard and Roper man?
Well, I definitely saw it more because I got a little older at the time when Roper was on. Siskel and Ebert was on at midnight in Toronto, so I would get
where he deserves to be in the blue slot.
So I would get my parents to tape it, and for me at that age, I think for a lot of people, part of the novelty was the idea of seeing 2 guys fight over movies.
And they did fight. Yeah. That's what was entertaining about it.
Yeah.
That Siskel often had the poorer taste of the both of them, where you'd be like, wait, what are you talking about?
Siskel was even bougier than
yes.
Ebert was, I think. But there were 2 guys who I think genuinely didn't particularly like each other.
Yeah, I mean, it's gone on record that they didn't, right?
Yeah, and I know that, after Siskel died, Ebert wrote tributes to him and everything. And
you are expected to do.
I'm sure they had mutual respect and everything, but they clearly they were professional rivals, and their personality types were very different. Like, Ebert was more garrulous in his personal life. Siskel was a family man who kind of kept to himself.
Yeah, Ebert liked to fuck.
Although there is a very funny section in the documentary Life Itself when we find out that Siskel spent a year basically at the Playboy Mansion. And there's a great photo of Siskel, like, with a big, like, Harry Reams mustache and this, like, topless woman next to him. And he's just, like, staring at her tits.
But I think that what Ebert and Siskel are most famous for and reviled for is minimizing the art of film criticism to a sums up or a sums down. That if you read people like Jonathan Rosenbaum or his ilk, they'll always rag on them for making that popular. And that ties into your statement. Ebert was a fan first and foremost, and he wanted people to go see these movies more than specifically like breaking them down.
Well, that's true. He definitely didn't have a combative relationship with movies. In a lot of his reviews, he took the critical philosophy of, like, you've got to grade these movies on their own terms.
Like, if I'm watching Shaolin Soccer, I have to rate it on the scale of, what about these fantasy kung fu soccer films, even though he gave it only 3 stars?
Well, that was a baffling review, by the way, because I think Shaolin Soccer
is a masterpiece.
Well, it's a great film, and he bent over backwards trying to justify his 3-star grade. It's like, dude, it's better than most of the shit you give 4 stars.
Just give it 4 stars, you liar.
Come on.
But does Roger Ebert have good taste?
Yes, but what I would say is that because he's the most famous critic, the quintessential critic, he's representative of something. He's representative of mainstream taste. White, liberal, upper middle class, educated mainstream taste. And within those parameters, like, his taste is a bellwether of what a reasonably educated, reasonably liberal, upper middle class guy would think at any given moment in history.
And that's why Ebert still has fans to this day, because his writing is appealing. Like, his books are still sold. He's not just the guy that was on TV that was popular. You see people talk rhapsodically all the time on the internet about how an important critic Roger Ebert was for them. So he still has value to this day.
Certainly, and I think he has value as, a roadmap to the canon with his great movies reviews or his Citizen Kane commentary track.
But where there's no value in what he did is how much he loved to trash horror movies. He hated especially exploitative horror movies like Friday the 13th and its ilk.
Well, I mean, he had a critical philosophy. I mean, he's somebody who didn't like nihilism in movies, what he perceived as in those. I guess this is a sticking point for you, right?
At a certain point, I have to realize that Roger Ebert is not the be-all, end-all. Like, if I disagree with him about something, that's fine, especially if I can quantify why I think I'm right, and in this particular case, he's wrong. But when he would write bad reviews for horror movies, what people would always say, and still say to this day, is, but he wrote Russ Meyer's Beyond the Valley of the Dolls. So the way that Beyond the Valley of the Dolls came about is that the studio wanted to make a sequel to the mega smash Valley of the Dolls, which was about young women falling prey to drugs and having their lives destroyed by it. But after the author of the novel sent in 2 drafts that they found unacceptable, Roger Ebert and Russ Meyer cobbled something together in 6 weeks and went to camera with it.
And it's basically a pastiche.
Yes.
It has nothing to do with the original Jacqueline Suzanne novel. And it's kind of a postmodern soup of a lot of different cliches.
I think it's a masterpiece.
I think it's a wonderful movie, too.
Yeah.
I think Ebert, as a writer, brings a kind of literate quality.
A lovable squareness trying to be hip.
It's definitely square, but, like, his script is full of, like, delightful lines, like, you will drink the black sperm of my vengeance.
Yeah.
Or,
I mean, they're all given the Z-Man, who gets to, like, spout these long soliloquies filled with, like, rapping and wordplay.
It's full of literary allusions. It is the script, oddly enough, of a Pulitzer Prize winner. You can definitely tell. And it's the script of somebody who's very media savvy. Like, this is somebody who's clearly spent a lot of time watching movies and internalizing their cliches. And the movie when you watch it, it doesn't amount to a whole lot except pure sensation.
Yeah, well, it's like a pop art kind of experience, right?
Yeah.
While you're watching it. I think that Russ Meyer, who we're not going to talk about too much because we're probably going to do an episode later on, is like the Eisenstein of boobs. Like the way that he crafts a sequence in such a interesting way, all usually through edits, because Myers was famous for not like moving the camera. Works really well with Ebert's script in delineating all these like super soap opera-ish sequences.
Yeah, like watching it this time, I was kind of amazed again by how indigestible the movie is.
Oh my god, right from the top, you're like 15 minutes in and you got like 4 montages and you're going, wait, what is this movie about?
Like, maybe we should say that the plot of the movie is a band called, well, in real life they're called the Strawberry Alarm Clock, but in the movie they're called the Cherry Nations.
Yeah, they're the Kelly Experience and then the Carrie Nations afterwards.
The Carrie Nations, and they're 3 sweet girls who want to go make it in Hollywood and make it and make it.
As the tagline said.
Yeah.
So what ends up happening is they play some rockin' tunes. The music is great in this movie.
Oh, unbelievable. I have the soundtrack album and I listen to it quite a bit.
As it has to happen, they fall into debauchery, which in Russ Meyer's terms is a lot of breasts.
They are pulled into the web of Z-Man, a Phil Spector-ish record producer, who, spoiler alert, in the twist ending, it turns out is actually a woman.
Which was made up on set?
Well, it was made up as Ebert was writing it, and I've heard Ebert describe the writing process as he and Meyer shared an office, and Meyer only wanted to hear the typewriter banging. If there was a long pause, like he would say, why the fuck aren't you writing? Like he didn't understand that writers sometimes need to pause and, consider. The script has this frenzied free
stream of consciousness, yeah.
And according to Ebert, when he called in from the other room and said, I've got it, Z-Man's a woman, Meyer said, I like it. You can never have too many tits in a movie.
Because if Myers and Ebert share something in common, is that they were both breast men.
Although I was flipping through Ebert's autobiography today, and they had a different relationship with breasts. Russ Meyer liked big, muscular, rock-hard breasts.
Like, he really got into, like, breast implants later in his life. Didn't matter.
Whereas Ebert liked softer, pendulous breasts.
Well, you get a mix of both of them in Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, which hits all those beats of, like, the star rises, the star falls, and then tacks on a out there epilogue with a little bit of the most dangerous game in it.
And people may ask, how could Ebert, the square guy, sweater-wearing TV personality, write this movie? It's because the movie is very square.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely square.
It has been accused of homophobia, which I think is, I don't know, maybe
I don't think me or you are the ones to tackle that subject.
Maybe. I know that Ebert has often cited the fact that B. Ruby Rich, the feminist critic, is a fan of the movie. So
yeah, and when you talk about Ebert as a moralist, it's impossible to kind of reconcile the film that has a gun, like, very seductively shoved down a woman's throat as she's sleeping naked.
I know that was a controversial at the time. In fact, Siskel gave the movie a bad review because of its mix of comedy and violence.
Which is something that Ebert would tackle over and over and over again in his reviews.
Have you seen any of the other Meyer-Ebert collaborations?
No, I haven't.
I'm quite a fan of Beneath the Valley of the Ultra Vixens. I think it's quite funny.
I'm going to be honest that I haven't actually seen that many Russ Meyer films.
I'm I would say a fair weather Russ Meyer fan. We can get into this when we do the episode on him, but I would say that the Criterion Blu-ray of Beyond the Valley of the Dolls has footage from a reunion of the cast and crew, and Ebert makes this long case in the reunion that he didn't think of Meyer's films as primarily pornographic. He thought they were not primarily meant to be titillating. They were meant to be funny or something. You can see him deliver this soliloquy on a panel next to Meyer. And I think that's Ebert just kind of trying to cover his ass.
Meyer loves breasts, like he loves them.
Like you are actually... Meyer was turned on by this stuff.
Yes.
And I think that if you don't necessarily share Meyer's fetish for ginormous rock-hard breasts and kind of a Robert Crumb-ish taste in women, like strong Amazonian women, you're not going to like it as much as Russ Meyer likes it.
Exactly. But Ebert was at one point going to write the script for a Sex Pistols film that was never produced.
Which was to be directed by Meyer, in fact.
Exactly. He kind of just left the screenwriting game because he was a big shot enough critic that he didn't have to do it anymore. He won the first Pulitzer Prize for film criticism.
I think there comes a point when, he's often said that he thought it was unseemly to be a critic but also have screenplays at Hollywood studios. But I think there comes a point when he probably had to have realized that, novels and screenplays were not where his talents lay.
Mm-hmm. I mean, if you look at his writing style, even in his autobiography, what you find is that it's just very simple, straightforward, unadorned, and that doesn't necessarily translate probably to the novels he wanted to write.
Yeah.
Because when I hear Ebert talk, I see a man who really wants to be literate and intellectual,
yes,
but that's not specifically where his gifts lay.
He had a relaxed formality to his prose that could be very good. And did you read his blog when he was writing it in his final years?
I did, yes.
I thought some of his blog entries were very strong.
Well, I think that
there's an unfussiness to the prose and a lack of sentimentality to some of his blog entries about, say, Siskel or his wife that were very strong.
When you were talking about Ebert in the context of someone that could learn, I think that his love of the internet and the possibilities it could give him is something that was pretty amazing and did keep him in the cultural conversation till the day of his death. And something else that kept him in the cultural conversation is his dislike for David Lynch's Blue Velvet.
Yeah.
Probably his most famous review.
Well, with Ebert, you didn't often go to him for an against-the-grain take. You went for him to be kind of, what is the official opinion about a movie?
I want to know all the popular mainstream films, so I'm going to go to Ebert to let me know what's important and what should I watch. It's the equivalent of one of those, top 100 IMDb lists.
Yeah, if you read one of his great movies reviews, you kind of get, and I don't mean this in really a bad way, the received wisdom about the movie. You get, why is this supposed to be great?
And, that does have value because, people who want to watch important films can crack that book open, read about it, and then go watch it. Yeah. And they'll know what they have to go see.
Or if they watched it and they didn't get it, they can get some sense of why they should have got it.
Exactly.
It's like, he does what we do. We're the new Siskel and Ebert.
But Blue Velvet is one that he famously did not like. And I was under the impression before we started recording this episode that he had changed his mind on it. But you pointed out that he admitted that he understood why it was culturally important. And even when he reviewed it, it was already being hailed as a masterpiece in some circles. But he still didn't like it.
So I'll read maybe a short excerpt from the review that kind of gives a sense of his objections. He says, "The sexual material in Blue Velvet is so disturbing, and the performance by Rossellini is so convincing and courageous that it demands a movie that deserves it. American movies have been using satire for years to take the edge off sex and violence. Occasionally, perhaps, sex and violence should be treated with the seriousness they deserve. Given the power of the darker scenes in this movie, we're all the more frustrated that the director is unwilling to follow through to the consequences of his insights." And then later on, he says, "Rossellini is asked to do things in this film that require real nerve. In one scene, she's publicly embarrassed by being dumped naked on the lawn of the police detective. In others, she's asked to portray emotions that I imagine most actresses would rather not touch. She is degraded, slapped around, humiliated, and undressed in front of the camera. And when you ask an actress to endure those experiences, you should keep your side of the bargain by putting her in an important film." This
is one of those Roger Ebert reviews. And it's rare because, like you said, he would echo the mainstream, where he just doesn't get it. I can understand where he's coming from, but I have to disagree completely with it. In the review, he also talks about that something that really bothered him is the fact that this darkness is then contrasted with humor.
Yeah.
In a way that really rubbed him the wrong way. It wasn't the fact that, suburban life is really dark underneath that bothered him. In fact, he actually makes fun of the cliche of that in his review.
Yeah.
But it's the comedy mixed in with the darkness that really bothered him.
He thinks the comedy cheapens the darkness. Well, his review with Gene Siskel, who liked the movie on TV, is kind of interesting because Siskel takes a pretty conventional approach to the movie where he says, you're seeing the surface of the town, but then you look underneath and you see the darkness. But when you actually watch the movie, and I think David Foster Wallace articulated this in his article about Lynch, there's no one scene in the movie that's either completely funny or completely upsetting and horrifying.
Because that's the beautiful thing about it, is that as a viewer, you're not quite sure how to feel.
Yeah.
Kyle MacLachlan in the movie is this, hardy boy, best guy. But then as the movie goes on, that darkness that's inside him starts to come out.
Yeah.
So the viewer is faced with this conflicted feeling of who am I supposed to root for in this scenario?
And then when Laura Dern finds out about his involvement with Isabella Rossellini, he almost kind of wants to say to her, no, that's not really me.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
But then you I guess, look at yourself and say, well, what would I be in that situation? Is there that kind of darkness in me? And would I recognize that as me?
Do you think that Ebert was looking at himself in the mirror and he felt conflicted by what he saw? Because Ebert, as a critic, like on TV, is like the straight-laced, clean-cut, like mainstream guy, but it's been pretty well documented that that's not how he was in his life.
He was a bit of a, what's the word I'm looking for? A poon hound?
Yes, he was. Liked to drink, liked to party.
Yeah.
Probably did some salacious stuff that thankfully didn't come back to haunt him in his life.
Well, we don't know if he did anything criminal. Probably not. I don't know about that.
I use the word salacious, not criminal.
He fucked.
Yeah, he loved to fuck.
Good for him. But it's such a peculiar review, but it is a disturbing movie. It's disturbing to think that good and evil are forces that are intertwined and
not clearly delineated in any way.
And it's easier to see if you're watching a brutal rape or torture scene of the kind that Blue Velvet has. It's easier if it's just presented as horrible, because we all know that it is horrible. To have elements of humor in it or titillation. Or titillation is a challenge.
And it comes down to the fact that Ebert, as the mainstream guy, also had to be aware of how dummy audiences would react to movies, right?
Yeah, that is a recurring concern throughout his career,
which is unfortunate.
But have you read his Death Race 2000 review?
No.
He gave it 0 stars, but again, it's like the Night of the Living Dead review.
Oh yeah, I remember you talking about this.
Yeah, he reviews the audience basically, and or he talks a lot about that in his concern about the Friday the 13th movies.
Will these movies influence an audience that don't know any better, and by consequence make them less emotional or empathetic people?
Yeah, he was always banging the drum of empathy.
Yeah, which, I can understand his position, but as we talked about the last episode, that also means that you're treating your audience like stupid people.
It's true, but he and Siskel, even though they were kind of liberal guys, always had this, especially in the 80s during the Reagan era, were always kind of going on about video nasties or I Spit on Your Grave or some other sort of. They often had some culture war thing they were dealing with.
Yeah, it boiled down to how dare they and think of the children.
Yeah, think of the children.
Yeah. Which,
Or Silent Night, Deadly Night was another one. I remember Siskel had a couple episodes where he was campaigning against the TV ads for that movie.
So when do you think was the time that you started rebelling against Ebert as the main critical figure in your life?
I think Ebert is somebody who, as a cinephile, one has to eventually graduate from. And I followed him very closely up until his death, and I still like him, but there was something about after his death, I think some connection with him and me broke. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that because he was the main critic, because he was the definitive critic, the audience followed him on that journey, and we're always following him week after week, seeing what does the main critic think. And once he died, that relationship was severed, and you're left with the body of work itself.
And you felt that that body of work could then be criticized and by consequence not reflect well on Ebert?
Well, it's just one of the essential things was that ongoing relationship he had with the audience. And when that relationship was severed...
one that continually evolved as he went along.
Yeah.
And that's what was appealing about it.
Yeah.
You were almost waiting for that moment where Ebert would go, you know what? I was wrong about the Friday the 13th films.
Yeah.
And that never happened, unfortunately.
And also, just as you become, I think, a more imaginative or, dare I say, sophisticated film goer, you're more interested in alternative...
And you want to rebel against what's mainstream.
I guess.
Yeah, no, I agree with you.
Yeah. But once you discover people like Rosenbaum or Hoberman...
Or even Pauline Kael.
Ebert seems a little safer.
And by consequence, not as much fun to read.
Yeah.
But your parents go, man, Roger Ebert liked this movie.
Yeah. But, is there any Ebert writing? There's still a lot of Ebert writing that I like. Have you read his Khan memoir?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah.
Which you say is one of your favorite pieces of Ebert writing. I really like it because it's a personal kind of descriptive side of Ebert that we rarely see. Because he would have to work in these short word count essays. And by consequence of that, you don't get like too much of a personal side to him. And this con essay, even though it is the writing of a very successful man just hanging out at con, having whatever he wants and getting tired from watching all these movies, it's still fun to read.
It's the best example of that genre of writing.
Yes.
It has a lightness to it, and it evokes the atmosphere of con. It's a book called 2 Weeks in the Midday Sun, and it's well worth reading.
And for a man that wrote so much criticism, there has to be some really weird ones that come out. Like his Scooby-Doo review.
Oh, the Scooby... Or what about the Garfield review?
Yeah, the Garfield review as well. But the Scooby-Doo review is like Ebert almost disassociating from like reality itself, trying to quantify how the Scooby-Doo film can exist.
Well, there's his review of Garfield, A Tale of Two Kitties. He wrote in character as Garfield.
That's like a man who's watched too many movies that day.
Baffling.
And has deadlines to reach.
I guess one last thing I would say in favor of Ebert is, as a kid watching Siskel and Ebert, he definitely made me aware of certain films. He made me aware of certain grown-up films.
Even if it's just like, mainstream classics like Antonioni.
Yeah. Maybe the internet has made a show like Siskel and Ebert irrelevant, but in the 80s when there weren't a lot of options to find out about movies or art house movies, Siskel and Ebert talking about My Dinner with Andre was a big boost for that movie.
Yeah, it's important that someone who everybody knows talks about films that are difficult. Like, if he talks about how important Ingmar Bergman films are, maybe someone who would not check them out would go see them and find their mind blown in some way, which matters.
2 thumbs up for Roger Ebert.
All right, so we do have letters this week, Will.
All right.
We have a letter from William Pond, and he goes, "Hey guys, my name is Will, and I am a TV editor based in London, England."
Hey.
Hello. Will, don't do accents, please.
No, fuck you. Justin did that voice.
I was recommended your podcast by a friend about a month ago, and since then I have been enjoying working through your back catalog. I particularly enjoyed the episode on Stephen Chow and Wong Kar-wai, a famous episode where me and Will heavily disagreed about a movie.
We were the Siskel and Ebert of the podcast world.
And one of the rare episodes where someone was listening to us record and jumps in a few times. Back when we were more scruffy and less polished than we are now.
Yeah. Now we have a responsibility to the listener.
To be honest, I don't always agree with your opinions, but I like the way you argue them. I took particular exception to the dissing of Marlon Brando's performance in Superman.
Wow.
Yeah.
What do you say about that? I mean, okay, here's the funny thing. The weird thing about having a podcast is that conversations you had a year and a half ago can come back to haunt you. I have no idea what I said about Marlon Brando in Superman, but I do think he's not good in it.
Well, it's been very well documented that Marlon Brando did not want to be in that film, at some point trying to convince Richard Donner to replace him by a glowing green crystal.
Really?
Yeah, but at the same time, I can understand the impact his performance would have on people that grew up with that film.
Yeah, okay.
And he is a major actor, right? So there is a level of gravitas that he brings to it.
First of all, I'm to the listener, I'm glad you liked Marlon Brando in the film, but every now and then, God love our listeners, but sometimes they'll pick Strange Hills to die on.
Oh, are you going to bring it up?
Yeah, I'm going to bring up the fact that one time we got a comment from somebody who...
vigorously.
One of our very early episodes when we talked about Woody Allen's film Anything Else really took exception to our I think, received wisdom dismissal of Anything Else. Talking about, very shocked that we said that it felt like a ripoff of Annie Hall.
Which it is.
But like, I'm kind of, doing a podcast like this, you sometimes realize that, everything has its fans.
Yeah, like, people will often say that they disagree with our opinions, which always takes me aback a little bit, because we are pretty mainstream in what we say. We're not going, Star Wars, piece of shit.
Well, I might say that, but okay. Anyway, thanks for sharing. Next time I watch Superman, which is probably not in the near future, I'll think about that.
And the letter continues, "It's great to hear you both bringing up Jonathan Rosenbaum so often, a writer I also greatly admire. I was wondering, have you considered doing an episode on Jacques Tati? I found Tati's work through Rosenbaum's extensive writing on the filmmaker, and he has now become one of my favorite directors. Keep up the good work. Cheers, Will."
I love Tati. Mm-hmm. I would love to do an episode on him.
I have not explored his work enough to discuss them in detail, but if we do pick them, then we can talk about them.
All right, we'll get to them.
So, for this week's Patreon episode, which you can subscribe to for $5 a month, you get 4 exclusive Important Cinema Club. You get 20-minute discussions about a movie we find on our shelf, or sometimes very personal talks about specific subjects.
Yeah, like our love lives, our relationships with our parents,
Exactly. And this week, we're going to be talking about the Midnight movie. Specifically, Midnight Madness, which happened at the Toronto International Film Festival, and that I've been attending for the last decade, usually in its entirety.
Okay.
And this year, my good friend Peter Kaplowski, who I co-programmed something with and who was a guest on the Important Cinema Club, programmed the Midnight Madness, so we'll have an inside look when we discuss it on this week's Patreon episode.
Okay.
Next week, we're going to get Classic Hollywood with an episode on director Otto Preminger.
Mr. Freeze himself.
He has a massive body of work. Is he considered a journeyman?
I don't think so. I think he's considered an auteur.
Yeah, because he was very specific about his films and was one of the key figures who helped destroy the blacklist when it was happening.
I did not know that. Okay.
And we'll be watching his classic Laura, and also Skidoo, his attempt to make a film that would speak to those teens out there.
Can't wait to revisit.
Have you seen it?
Of course.
Oh, I haven't. So it's going to be
good.
a fun time.
Yeah. Until then, the balcony is closed.
You know what? I'll give you this one. You can send us letters at Important Cinema Club Podcast at gmail.com. My name's Justin DeClue.
My name's Roger Ebert.
Thanks for listening. So it was the Toronto International Film Festival this week, Will. You get to see all the stars?
Oh, God. I saw Adam McGowan walk down the street. I saw Cedric the Entertainer.
Did you?
Yeah, at the screening of First Reformed that I went to.
So you saw a little bit more than 6 films, right?
I think I saw... I'm still seeing a few this weekend. I'm seeing Death of Stalin tomorrow.
Oh, it's so good.
I can't wait.
So good.
Yeah, and I'm going to see the Jim Carrey, Andy Kaufman movie because I got a free ticket.
I was lucky enough to see a whole bunch of films, and the lesson I learned this year was if I just go see the good films, I will have a good time.
Classic. I remember thinking back on times when I was accredited as a journalist for when I was a student critic, and I would go see these movies like The Men Who Stare at Goats. Why would I see that at TIFF? What a fucking waste of time.
Like, you can see so many movies at a film festival like that that you will never see, probably ever, if not just a big screen. I got to see films like Sweet Country, a Australian Western that dealt with racial relations and had a great Sam Neill performance. High Fantasy, which is a great South African picture about a bunch of teenagers who go for a camping trip in the desert, do some Freaky Friday body switching, and then have to deal with the racial repercussions of that. Which has a great gimmick that it's all shot on iPhones within the context of the film. So it's like a found footage picture.
Well, I saw Manhunt by John Woo, which I thought was fun.
You told me that you were a little bit uncomfortable with the audience's reaction while watching it.
Well, it's an interesting thing with a movie like that because it's undeniably a funny movie. Not intentionally.
Yes.
It's
almost like a parody in its style.
Yeah, it's pure kind of, as you said, self-parodic John Woo, and a lot of the scenes in the movie have, there's a Japanese main character and there's a Chinese main character, and they communicate in English.
Very bad English.
Very bad English, but in that very heightened, like, John Woo acting style.
You reached an end. A dead end.
Yeah, and so, like, I part of me thinks, well, I guess it's okay to laugh at this. But then I think, what is the difference between laughing at this and just not being open to the experience of something?
Yeah, I think there is a big difference. I think that, like, I'm someone who tends to annoyingly, like, guffaw and applaud when I'm watching a movie that I very much enjoy, and it gets, like, a visceral reaction in me, which something like Manhunt will do over and over again.
Yeah.
I'd like to think that I'm laughing with the film. I'm enjoying what he's doing, as opposed to, like we talked about in the bad movie episode, laughing because it's so bad and they don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Because, did we talk about Manhunt last week?
You talked about it a little bit, yeah.
Yeah. Like I mentioned, it is a movie that feels like it's the final film of a filmmaker. Because it's almost ridiculously packed with John Woo-isms.
Yeah, it's got the doves. Yeah. It's got, at one point, somebody even wishes someone a better tomorrow, and the audience applauded when they said that.
Visual doubling and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think it also depends on, like, who you're with. Did you see it alone, or did you see it with someone
else? I saw it alone, yeah.
Is that when you're with an audience like that, you're like, I don't know how they're reacting. Like, are they with me or are they against me? Like, I saw it was two people that I knew who were definitely, like, laughing with it.
I saw it next to a white guy who I thought was laughing a little too much.
Oh, really?
Which I think might have soured it a little bit. But again, I'm not sure what is too much in a case like this. But I know it when I see it, like the Supreme Court on pornography. You know?
Yeah, I think it's a movie that if me and you had, like, seen it at the Young and Dundas, you would have probably enjoyed it more.
Well, probably, actually, because we also would have seen it with, you know, a more predominantly Chinese audience who probably would have been less inclined to laugh at it.
But you also got to see Paul Schrader's first Reformed.
Which I very much enjoyed.
A film that when you said that you were going to see it, I went, why? Like, Paul Schrader has been shitting the bed for 2 decades?
Autofocus was probably the last really unqualified good movie he made.
His film Dog Eat Dog that played last year at Midnight Madness is a huge piece of shit.
Okay, I saw Dog Eat Dog with you and some of our friends, and I was the only one of us who kind of liked it.
I can absolutely see where it's coming from, being a film that after the difficult experience that Paul Schrader had making Dying of the Light with Nicolas Cage, which was taken out of his hands and recut by the producers, he felt he just wanted to unleash himself and just do all the ideas that he always wanted to do in a completely incoherent fashion that is not satisfying on any level. But I can see why
Willem
you
Dafoe's
enjoyed
fun.
that.
Nicolas Cage is fun. It's got a lot of wacky, stylistic stuff in it. I don't know. Maybe if I saw it again in the cold light of day, I would... Because it's a movie that I have to stretch to defend a little bit.
But like I said, I can understand why people like it.
I found it fun. First Reformed is a movie that I don't have to make a lot of apologies for. It feels like the ultimate Paul Schrader movie, the one that has all of his preoccupations in it. It's very... The style of it is very coherent.
I don't want to do a full Paul Schrader episode, but, like, for people that don't know, Schrader, the writer of Taxi Driver, is obsessed with Robert Bresson. He's written the book on transcendental cinema, which mostly tackles with Bresson, Ozu, and people like that. And he's gone to the point of recreating the ending of Pickpocket in 2 of his films.
And actually, this movie even has a little bit of that when Amanda Seyfried is on top of Ethan Hawke and their hands are together.
And so the film is about Ethan Hawke, who plays a sick preacher in charge of this little touristy church called the First Reformed. And his struggle with having a parishioner do something bad and the way that affects his life. I don't want to get too much into spoilers because it's a film that its plot synopsis could be completely covered in about 3 sentences, and the Variety review on the film completely spoils it.
Oh, too
including the final shot of the film.
Oh, no.
But I think that with this picture, Paul Schrader has just... I don't know how he did it, but he just figured out what he wanted to say. From the point that the film is shot in the Academy ratio, the, like... Diary of a County Priest font from at like the beginning to it's basically a reimagining of that film.
Yeah.
And an amazing Ethan Hawke performance at its center.
Incredible. And it's an interesting marriage of the Robert Bresson style with the kind of Taxi Driver style.
Almost grindhousey style.
Yeah.
And at the same time, Schrader is having a lot of fun with the film.
Yeah.
For all of its stylistic minimalism, it's also, like, very playful.
Yeah, but he does use that transcendental style where he's talked about how the style of Bresson makes you as the viewer interact with it more. You have to
actively participate.
Yeah, because he's giving you less in terms of his, like, shot compositions and everything.
What do you think of, like, some critics have come out and been like, this is one of his best films? I think that may just be the result of him not making a film for so long.
I think it's probably one of his best films. Well, I mean, he has a lot of dross in his career, frankly.
Yeah, he does. And he has a lot of interesting films that don't quite work, like, that I enjoy, like Hardcore.
But I think this is definitely, in the same league as American Gigolo or, some of the better ones like that.
And it's one that his intent, I believe, is completely translated to the screen. Even though that he visually references the Taxi Driver by way of Jean-Luc Godard staring at the milk and the coffee thing
with Pepto-Bismol
in a glass of alcohol.
Yeah.
That's like him being like, huh? Which somehow is not annoying.
Yeah. I would say that this should be his last film, but it
feels like his last film.
But I want more. Now that Schrader's back on his bullshit, I want to see more.
I mean, that's like a topic for another day, but it's kind of crazy that he's in the twilight years of his career, and that he can somehow, like, pull this one out. That's like that's the equivalent of Dario Argento being like, here's another Suspiria.
Yeah, we've talked about this at times where I'm kind of like, I don't expect anything great from John Woo anymore. But yeah, when some of them can do it,
You know what would be a great double bill? First Reformed and Manhunt, back to back, because they are the pure distillations of both those filmmakers' work. But at the same time, TIFF has been a little bit under fire this year, Will. There was an article that came out in Variety that tried to postulate that. Does the festival feel a little bit smaller this year?
And that came out a year after they said that it was too big. Yes. But in fairness to Variety, I think what they were meaning was its influence is smaller, its impact is smaller. I think that, obviously TIFF has its problems, which I think we talked about 2 episodes ago, about the way it brands itself. And
still waiting for that call, TIFF.
Yeah, come on, hire us. But part of the problem facing TIFF too is just the way that independent movies and film culture are evolving.
And how films are distributed.
Yeah, everything's shot on digital, and, Netflix and Amazon are the major players. And, frankly, prestige TV, so-called, has, risen at, kind of at the expense of film. So it's less exciting to go to a film festival for all these reasons, and that's unavoidable.
I still think that there's value in the sense of TIFF will give you hundreds of films that you can not see anywhere else. Some of them very good. Yeah. But that Variety article, its main bone of contention was, where are the big blockbuster films? Where are the La La Lands? There's none at this festival.
Well, also, the festival seems to be trying to prioritize world premieres more than it ever has. Which seems to mean that we're getting a lot of kind of second tier stuff. If it's a big movie with big stars that gets its world premiere at TIFF instead of Telluride or the New York Film Festival or Cannes, you kind of get the sense that there's something wrong with it.
Yeah, like Suburbicon opening.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, okay, yeah, that's not very good.
And that might just be, maybe TIFF should go back to being Festival of Festivals.
Or the People's Festival.
Or the People's Festival.
I mean, we don't know the details. It's definitely a money flows thing.
Yeah.
But if they made it more accessible to people, because it's not really right now.
Well, it's too expensive.
Yeah.
I remember when I started going to TIFF 10 years ago, tickets were $22, and now they're $28 to $35. And there's a big difference there, psychologically.
Yeah. Once it starts edging to the $30, it's like, nope, not happening. I can't do it.
Yeah.
But it's still an amazing place to listen to people in line who have no idea what they're about to see. When I was watching First Reformed, there was people behind me who were like, what is this film? I don't know what it is. Oh, who's this Paul Schrader guy? Let me look. Huh, he seems to have made Taxi Driver. That's a real old school movie.
Oh, man.
And then right after that, one of the guys went, hey, I met George Clooney. Yeah, we hung out. And they were like, oh, yeah, really? So maybe that's the audience of TIFF.
Sometimes it's fun to see a really confrontational movie. I'm not a particular fan of Kim Ki-duk.
Yeah.
Sometimes I used to like to go see his movies at TIFF just because, it would be interesting to watch the reaction of the audience.
Well,
it's a movie like Pieta.
It's an audience that is often given these tickets through their high-class jobs as, tokens. Like, oh, go see this movie.
Or I vacationed in South Korea. Pieta will probably be fun.